The greatest secret the Emperor hid from the Primarchs was not a weapon, a lost world, or a forbidden piece of technology. It was the true nature of chaos. The Emperor knew that the warp was not just a strange dimension used for travel and psychic power. He knew that something lived inside it. Something ancient, hungry, intelligent, and capable of corrupting even the strongest minds in the galaxy. But he did not tell his sons the truth. During the Great Crusade, the Emperor built the Imperium on the imperial truth. Humanity was taught that gods were lies, religion was weakness, and superstition was a disease that had to be erased. The Primarchs carried that message across the stars. They destroyed cults, burned temples, and forced human worlds to abandon worship. To most of them, the galaxy was dangerous but understandable. Aliens could be killed, tyrants could be overthrown, ignorance could be corrected. Chaos did not fit that worldview. The warp was explained as a dangerous but natural force. Psychers could use it, ships could travel through it, strange predators lived inside it. But the deeper truth was hidden. The warp contained powers that fed on emotion, manipulated reality, and could offer strength, immortality, and forbidden knowledge in exchange for loyalty. The Primarchs were never properly warned that the enemy could speak to them through dreams, visions, wounds, pride, and grief. This silence became deadly. Horus did not fall because he was weak in a simple sense. He fell because chaos reached him at the exact moment when doubt had already opened a door. On Davin, he was shown visions of the future. The Emperor worshipped as a god, the Primarchs forgotten, and the Imperium turned into a nightmare. If Horus had understood chaos fully, he might have recognized the manipulation. Instead, he believed he had discovered a hidden truth. Lorgar fell for the same reason in a different way. He needed gods. He needed meaning beyond conquest and compliance. When the Emperor humiliated him at Monarchia and rejected his worship, Lorgar did not stop believing. He simply searched for gods elsewhere. Chaos answered him because the Emperor had left a spiritual vacuum and pretended it did not exist. Magnus also paid the price. He was the most psychic of the Primarchs, yet even he was not told enough. He believed the warp could be studied, bargained with, and mastered through knowledge. He thought he was too intelligent to be deceived by it. That arrogance became one of the roads to disaster. The Emperor's logic was simple but cruel. He believed that teaching humanity about chaos would make chaos stronger. He thought ignorance could function as armor. If people did not know the names of the gods, they would not worship them. If the Primarchs rejected religion, they would reject demons as well. But the plan failed because chaos did not need to be understood before it could corrupt. It only needed weakness, ambition, fear, pain, or pride. By hiding the truth, the Emperor left his sons unprepared for the most dangerous enemy they would ever face. The tragedy is that the Primarchs were built to conquer the galaxy, but not all of them were taught what was truly waiting inside it. The Emperor gave them armies, fleets, and worlds to burn. But when the gods of the warp finally whispered to them, many of his sons had no idea how deep the lie really went. The second secret the Emperor hid from the Primarchs was the real reason he abandoned the Great Crusade and returned to Terra. To many of his sons, it looked like betrayal. They had conquered in his name, bled for his dream, and built the Imperium world by world. Then, when the crusade was not yet finished, the Emperor left them behind. He gave command to Horus, named him War Master, and withdrew into the Imperial Palace. The official explanation was vague. Terra needed him. The Imperium required deeper administration. There were matters only the Emperor could handle. But the Primarchs were not told the full truth. Beneath the Imperial Palace, the Emperor was building humanity's escape route from the warp. His secret project was an attempt to access and control the Webway, the ancient network of hidden passages once used by the Old Ones and mastered by the Eldar. If the Emperor succeeded, mankind would no longer depend on warp travel in the same way. Human ships could move across the galaxy without risking demonic attack, possession, madness, or the constant danger of being lost in the Imperium. This was not just another imperial project. It was the foundation of the Emperor's true plan. He wanted humanity to evolve into a psychic species without being devoured by chaos. To do that, he needed to remove mankind's dependence on the warp before humanity's psychic awakening became uncontrollable. The Webway was the key, but almost none of the Primarchs knew this. Horus did not know that the Emperor had left the Crusade to save humanity from its greatest long-term threat. He only saw his father disappear, leaving him to carry the burden of command. Other Primarchs felt ignored, discarded, or used. They had been created to serve a grand design, but the design itself was hidden from them. This secrecy created resentment. The Primarchs were not ordinary generals. They were demigods with pride, ambition, wounds, and questions. Many of them wanted to know why they had been made, what future awaited them, and why their father trusted them with armies, but not with the truth. The Webway Project also explains why Magnus's mistake was so catastrophic. When Magnus used sorcery to warn the Emperor about Horus's betrayal, he did not understand what he was breaking. His psychic message shattered the protective wards around the secret human Webway entrance beneath the palace. Demons flooded in, and the Emperor was forced to spend his remaining strength holding the breach closed. In that moment, the Emperor's greatest plan began to die. Had the Primarchs understood the Webway Project, some of the heresy might have unfolded differently. Horus might have seen the Emperor's withdrawal as necessity rather than abandonment. Magnus might have understood why reckless war power was forbidden. The Loyalists might have protected the project with greater urgency. Instead, the Emperor kept the truth buried beneath terror. The tragedy of the Webway Project is that it was meant to free humanity from chaos, but secrecy helped chaos destroy it. The Emperor hid the plan because it was too important to risk, yet by hiding it from his own sons, he made them easier to divide, easier to manipulate, and easier to turn against the future he was trying to build. The third secret the Emperor hid from the Primarchs was the truth about what they really were. To the Imperium, the Primarchs were presented as the Emperor's sons, created by science, genecraft, and unmatched human genius. They were stronger, smarter, faster, and more charismatic than any ordinary human could ever be. They were weapons, rulers, symbols, and generals all at once. But they were not made by science alone. The Primarchs carried something deeper inside them, something connected to the warp. Each of them was more than flesh and engineered perfection. They had presences that could inspire armies, break minds, alter fate, and shape the people around them, almost like living myths. Sanguinius seemed angelic beyond biology. Magnus was a psychic force of nature. Kurz saw futures he could not escape. Lorgar could move entire civilizations through faith. Even the least mystical Primarchs felt larger than natural life. The Emperor knew this. He had built them that way. One of the darkest mysteries in Imperial history is what happened on Molech. Long before the heresy, the Emperor traveled there and passed through a strange gate connected to the warp. What he found beyond it is not fully known. Some accounts suggest he bargained with the powers of the Imperium. Others suggest he stole power from them. Whatever the truth, he returned changed, carrying the knowledge or force needed to create the Primarchs. He never told them. This mattered because the Primarchs were taught to despise gods, reject superstition, and trust the Emperor's vision of reason. Yet their own existence may have depended on the very realm their father refused to honestly explain. They were told they were products of human mastery, but part of them belonged to something older, stranger, and far more dangerous. Chaos understood this weakness. The gods did not treat the Primarchs like ordinary mortals. They wanted them because they recognized what they were, beings with enough power, symbolism, and warp resonance to change the destiny of the galaxy. When a Primarch fell, it was not just one commander turning traitor, It was a living force of the Emperor's design being twisted into a weapon against him. Horus learned part of this secret when he later went to Molech himself. After passing through the same kind of power his father had once used, he emerged far stronger. That moment revealed something terrifying. The Emperor had not simply warned his sons away from dangerous knowledge. He had hidden the fact that his own empire was built with that knowledge. For some Primarchs, the truth might have changed everything. Magnus would have understood that his psychic nature was not an accident. Lorgar would have seen that the Emperor's war against gods was more complicated than simple atheism. Horus might have realized that his father's strength had come from a place the Emperor refused to name. The secret of the Primarchs was not only that they were weapons, it was that they were weapons made with fire the Emperor claimed humanity should never touch. And when chaos finally came to collect what it believed it was owed, many of those weapons did not even understand why the gods wanted them so badly. The fourth secret the Emperor hid from the Primarchs was the fate of two of their own brothers. In Imperial history, 20 Primarchs were created, but by the time of the Great Crusade and the Horus Heresy, only 18 were openly remembered. The 2nd and 11th Primarchs had been erased, their names were removed, their legions were forgotten, their statues were covered or destroyed. Even among the Primarchs, speaking about them became dangerous. This was not simple death. Many Primarchs died or vanished later, but they were still remembered. Sanguinius was worshipped, Ferrus Manus was mourned, Horus was cursed. The lost two were treated differently. They were not allowed to exist in memory. That alone makes the secret terrifying. The Emperor did not merely hide details from his sons, he forced an entire empire to pretend that two Primarchs had never mattered. Records were sealed, servants were silenced, imperial history was rewritten around an absence. For a civilization built on conquest and obedience, this kind of erasure meant the truth was worse than defeat. The remaining Primarchs knew enough to understand that something had happened. They were not children. They noticed the missing places, the forbidden references, the strange silence around two legions that should have stood beside them. But whatever they knew was incomplete, and whatever they remembered may have been deliberately altered. Some hints suggest that the lost Primarchs did not simply fall in battle. If they had died heroically, the Imperium could have turned them into martyrs. If they had failed militarily, the Emperor could have used their defeat as a warning. But total erasure suggests something more dangerous: corruption, rebellion, genetic failure, contact with forbidden powers, or a truth that could have damaged the unity of the Great Crusade. For the other Primarchs, this silence carried an unspoken threat. If two sons of the Emperor could be erased so completely, then none of them were truly safe from their father's judgment. They were not only children, they were assets. If an asset became too dangerous, too broken, or too inconvenient, it could be removed from history. This mattered deeply because many Primarchs already feared being used. Angron had been taken from the slave rebellion he wanted to die fighting. Perturabo believed he was treated as a tool. Mortarion hated tyrants and saw control everywhere. Lorgar wanted love and meaning, but received punishment. Even Horus, the favored son, feared that the Emperor would eventually discard the warriors who built his empire. The lost Primarchs proved that this fear was not impossible. The Emperor may have had reasons. Perhaps the truth about the 2nd and 11th was so dangerous that revealing it would have shattered the crusade. Perhaps their legions had seen something that could not be allowed to spread. Perhaps they failed in a way that threatened the entire future of mankind. But secrecy has consequences. By hiding the fate of two sons, the Emperor taught the others that love and loyalty had limits. He showed them that even Primarchs could disappear if they crossed a line they were not allowed to understand. The lost Primarchs became a warning written in silence, and in that silence, Many of the Emperor's surviving sons could imagine their own fate. The fifth secret the Emperor hid from the Primarchs was what happened to the warriors who came before the Space Marines. Before the Legiones Astartes marched across the stars, before the Primarchs led the Great Crusade, the Emperor had already built an army to conquer Terra. They were called the Thunder Warriors. They were not elegant creations like the Space Marines. They were brutal, unstable, and terrifyingly powerful. The Thunder Warriors were made for one purpose: to win the unification wars on Terra. They fought through poisoned wastelands, techno-barbarian kingdoms, mutant empires, and warlord states armed with ancient weapons. They were the Emperor's first great weapon of conquest, and they succeeded. The Thunder Warriors helped the Emperor take Terra. They broke enemies that ordinary humans could never have defeated. They gave him the foundation from which the Imperium would be built. Without them, there may have been no united Terra, no Great Crusade, and no future empire of mankind. But they were flawed. Their bodies were unstable. Many suffered physical breakdown, madness, or uncontrollable aggression. They were designed for a brutal planetary war, not for a long galactic future. Once Terra was conquered, they became dangerous. They knew too much, they were too violent, and they no longer fit the Emperor's next stage. So they were removed. The most infamous moment came at Mount Ararat, where the Thunder Warriors were destroyed after their usefulness had ended. Official Imperial history buried the truth beneath noble language and silence. To the public, they were heroes of a lost age. In reality, many were slaughtered by the very regime they had helped create. This secret mattered because the Primarchs and Space Marines were also weapons. They were more advanced, more stable, and more glorious, but they were still created for conquest. They were built to reunite humanity, destroy enemies, and enforce the Emperor's vision. The fate of the Thunder Warriors raised a terrifying question. What happens to the Emperor's weapons when the war is over? Some Primarchs may have feared the answer without fully knowing the truth. Angron believed the Emperor saw warriors as tools. Perturabo felt used and discarded. Horus feared that once the Crusade ended, the Primarchs would be replaced by politicians, administrators, and ordinary humans. The memory of the Thunder Warriors suggested that this fear was not madness. It had happened before. The Emperor may have believed it was necessary. The Thunder Warriors were unstable, and keeping them alive could have endangered the future he was trying to build. But necessity did not make the act less cold. He had created them, used them, celebrated their victories, and then allowed them to vanish when they became inconvenient. If the Primarchs had fully understood this history, many of them would have looked at their father differently. The Great Crusade might not have seemed like destiny. It might have seemed like a temporary assignment. The legions might not have seemed eternal. They might have seemed like the next generation of tools waiting to be replaced. That is why the fate of the Thunder Warriors was so dangerous as a secret. It showed the Emperor's pattern. He could love his creations, honor them, and depend on them, but if his future no longer had a place for them, he could erase them. For the Primarchs, that truth was more frightening than any enemy beyond the stars. The sixth secret the Emperor hid from the Primarchs was that the Imperial truth was never the whole truth. It was presented as the foundation of the Great Crusade: reason over superstition, science over religion, unity over myth. Humanity was told that gods did not exist, that worship was weakness, and that every cult, shrine, and temple had to be erased from mankind to survive. The Primarchs carried this message across the stars. They brought worlds into compliance not only through war, but through ideology. If a planet worshipped spirits, gods, ancestors, machines, or demons, that belief was treated as a sickness. Churches were burned. Priests were executed or silenced. Entire cultures were forced to abandon the sacred systems that had held them together for thousands of years. But the Emperor knew the situation was more complicated. The gods of chaos were real, even if they were not gods in the way mortals understood the word. The warp did respond to belief, emotion, ritual, sacrifice, and worship. Faith had power. Symbols had power. Names had power. The Emperor denied religion publicly, while privately fighting a war against beings that fed on the very forces religion could awaken. That meant the imperial truth was not pure honesty. It was a strategy. The Emperor believed that if humanity stopped worshipping, chaos would starve. If people rejected gods, demons would have fewer paths into their minds. If superstition was destroyed, mankind might become rational enough to evolve without being consumed by the warp. The lie was meant to protect humanity from a truth too dangerous to spread. But the Primarchs were not told that it was a lie with a purpose. They were told it was reality. This created a terrible weakness. Lorgar believed the Emperor deserved worship because he looked at him and saw divinity. When the Emperor punished him for building religious worlds, Lorgar was not given the full explanation. He was humiliated, not educated. His faith was crushed, but his need for meaning remained. Chaos stepped into that wound and gave him the gods his father denied. Magnus believed knowledge should never be forbidden. If the imperial truth meant reason and understanding, then why should the warp be treated with fear? He thought secrecy was ignorance. He did not understand that some knowledge could infect the mind before it could be mastered. Even Horus was vulnerable because the imperial truth taught him that gods were impossible. When chaos finally showed him visions, power, and prophecy, the shock made the deception feel larger. It seemed as if the Emperor had lied about everything, not merely hidden a dangerous part of the truth. The tragedy is that the Emperor was trying to build a shield around humanity, but instead of telling his sons that the shield existed, he asked them to fight blind behind it. They enforced the imperial truth without understanding its real purpose, and when they discovered the truth beneath it, some felt betrayed. The imperial truth was meant to kill gods by starving them of belief. Instead, it helped create the greatest religious empire in human history after the Emperor's fall. The Primarchs were told to destroy worship, but in the end, mankind worshipped the Emperor more fanatically than any god he had tried to erase. The seventh secret the Emperor hid from the Primarchs was the future he was really preparing humanity for. The Great Crusade looked like a war of conquest. To most of the Primarchs, the mission was simple: reunite human worlds, destroy alien threats, erase superstition, and build an empire strong enough to survive forever. But the Emperor was not only building an empire, he was trying to guide humanity through a dangerous evolution. Across the galaxy, more and more humans were being born with psychic abilities. Some could see the future. Some could hear thoughts. Some could bend reality in small ways. Others became gateways for demons without ever understanding what was happening to them. This was not a rare mutation. It was the beginning of a species-wide transformation. The Emperor knew that humanity was slowly becoming a psychic race. If controlled, this could make mankind powerful enough to survive the galaxy's greatest threats. If uncontrolled, it could destroy humanity from within. A single untrained psyker could invite possession, summon demons, corrupt a world, or tear open a path into the warp. The Primarchs were not told the full scale of this danger. They saw psykers as useful tools, dangerous mutants, or battlefield assets depending on their legion and their beliefs. But most of them did not understand that the entire human species was moving toward the same abyss Magnus had already touched. This secret explains why the Emperor was so obsessed with control. He did not only want obedience because he was arrogant. He wanted humanity united before its psychic awakening became impossible to contain. A divided mankind would produce billions of vulnerable minds across isolated worlds, each one a possible doorway for chaos. The Webway Project was part of this same plan. If humanity could travel without relying on the warp, then its growing psychic power might be protected from the worst dangers of the Imperium. The Emperor wanted to remove mankind from the trap before the trap closed. but his sons were left with fragments instead of the whole picture. Magnus thought psychic power could be mastered through knowledge and confidence. Lorgar thought the spiritual hunger of humanity needed gods. Mortarion hated witchcraft without understanding the larger evolution behind it. Russ was used as a weapon against sorcery while still relying on his own legion's strange traditions. The Emperor demanded obedience without explaining the future he feared. That silence made his decisions look colder than they already were. The Edict of Nicaea, the punishment of Magnus, the hatred of religion, the secrecy around the Webway, all of it seemed like contradiction, hypocrisy, or control for its own sake. But beneath it was one terrifying truth. Humanity was changing, and if the Emperor failed, mankind might become another Eldar empire, birthing horrors into the warp through its own uncontrolled power. The tragedy is that this was one secret the Primarchs needed to understand. They were not just generals of a crusade. They were meant to shepherd humanity through the most dangerous stage of its existence. Instead, many of them believed they were only conquering worlds for a father who no longer trusted them. The Emperor saw the psychic future coming, but by hiding it, he made his sons less prepared to face it. And when the heresy began, that future arrived not as salvation, but as madness, demons, possession, and civil war. The eighth secret the Emperor hid from the Primarchs was the future he intended for them after the Great Crusade. His sons were created to conquer the galaxy, but the question none of them could fully answer was simple. What happens to weapons when the war is over? During the Crusade, the Primarchs had purpose. They commanded legions, conquered worlds, destroyed alien empires, and brought lost human civilizations into compliance. Their existence made sense because the Imperium was still expanding. Every battle justified their power. Every victory proved they were necessary. But the Emperor's dream was not endless war. At least publicly, the Great Crusade was meant to end. Humanity would be reunited. The galaxy would be secured. Religion would be erased. The Webway would free mankind from dependence on the warp. A new human civilization would rise, guided by order, reason, and control. In that future, the Primarchs became a dangerous question. Some of them could have ruled. Guilliman had already built Ultramar into one of the most stable regions of human space. Dawn could fortify and govern. Sanguinius could inspire loyalty across entire civilizations. Vulcan cared deeply for ordinary humans. These suns might have had a place in a peaceful Imperium. But what about Angron, who existed only as rage and pain? What about Kurz, who ruled through terror? What about Mortarion, who trusted almost no authority? What about Perturabo, who believed he was valued only for grinding wars of attrition? What about the legions themselves, millions of warriors engineered for conquest? The Emperor never gave them a clear answer. Horus feared that the Primarchs would be discarded once the Crusade ended. He had seen mortal administrators gain influence. He had seen the Emperor withdraw to Terra. He had watched warriors bleed to build an empire that ordinary humans would eventually govern. To Horus, it looked as if the sons who won the galaxy might not be allowed to shape it. That fear was not irrational. The Thunder Warriors had already shown the Emperor's pattern. They were created for the Unification Wars, used to conquer Terra, and then removed when they no longer fit the future. The Primarchs did not know the full truth, but the shadow of that possibility hung over them. This secrecy wounded the legions as well. Space Marines were not ordinary soldiers who could simply return home. They were built for war, brotherhood, obedience, and violence. If the galaxy was pacified, would they become guardians, rulers, police, or relics? Would they be honored, divided, controlled, or quietly destroyed? The Emperor may have had a plan. Perhaps some Primarchs would govern. Perhaps some would guard humanity's psychic evolution. Perhaps others would be sent beyond the galaxy or placed in roles only he understood. But by never explaining that future, he allowed fear to fill the silence.
Chaos used that fear perfectly. It whispered that the Emperor had used his sons.
It told Horus that the Primarchs would be forgotten. It told bitter warriors that they were tools waiting to be replaced. And because the Emperor had hidden so much already, the lie sounded close enough to truth. The final secret was not only what the Emperor planned to do after victory, it was that his sons did not know whether victory had a place for them at all. That uncertainty helped destroy everything. The Primarchs were made to build the Imperium, but many never believed they truly belonged in the future it promised. And when chaos offered them another future, some chose betrayal over being discarded by the father who had never trusted them with the whole truth.